And we are recording the session so that we have it for note-taking purposes, and in case at any point anyone is not able to see the screen, and if anybody wants to view it, it will certainly be available to the public. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our group norms. This is how we try to operate in this session, in previous sessions, and in future sessions. We invite you to promote a spirit of inquiry. We welcome pausing, paraphrasing, and probing for specificity, and we each have a responsibility for that. If you have an idea, we welcome them. We invite you to pay attention to your own needs and the needs of others. And we also invite all of us to start with and presume positive intentions. You're welcome to use chat and to share any questions or responses. For those of you who have been in sessions before, you'll know that I will be keeping an eye on that and be saying it aloud so that we're sure everyone can get both an oral and a written understanding. If you prefer to speak, we invite you to raise your hand. If using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen proves problematic for some reason, you're welcome to wave, and we'll be keeping our eye out, our eyes open for hands. We will end on time. We have a 2:30 stop, and we will be prompt because we know you have other obligations. And to the extent that you are able, we really invite you to silence your electronics and disengage from them throughout this discussion. So thank you in advance for your attention to this work. Next slide. So the way we're going to move through this is we have a series of questions. We did send a primer out in advance, so you could begin to think about things you might want to offer up during this discussion. Nancy, the chair, will be reviewing a number of slides for your benefit, and we will have specific points at which we'll invite you to weigh in. And Nancy, with that, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, what we're going to do today is we're really going to anchor ourselves a bit in what the resolve says, what is our work. And while we're looking at what our work is, what I'd like us all to think about is what do we need to know in order to do our work? Some of that is going to be a little simpler than the Part B 619 report, but it might not be. We still have a lot. So this is the opportunity for us to really sit down, evaluate the work, and say, what kind of questions do we need to ask, or what kind of materials do we need to expect to be able to do this job? So let's move through, and at almost every slide, I'm going to stop and say, what do you think? But first, let's move through the resolve first. Next slide. So the resolve is oh no, I'm sorry, go back one. There it is. So this basically names us. Now there's 12 representative bodies. I noticed there's 29 participants in this room, which is a little bit of a, so I don't know everybody in the room. But I really think it's important that the 12 representative bodies, if you are one of those, as opposed to a support person, you're the ones that I'm really looking to get your feedback. You are the ones charged by this job. All right. And we've asked to circulate the committee member names, body, and contact information. Next slide. Our job is, well, the department's job is to develop a plan for early intervention services for Part C services, and our job is to comment on it and provide information based on that. I sent out beforehand, we sent out a primer with some beginning questions for us to think about, and we're going to go through each part of this in a minute, but very, very briefly, the Department of Education is to develop a plan that provides services through a quasi-independent government agency structure, consult with us, and suggest legislation. Next slide.
I'm having trouble making this move. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Sorry.
The DOE is to conduct an analysis of the federal extended sea partnership and make recommendations for services. Next slide. And they're going to report on it. And it was an emergency moving fast. So next slide, and let's really take a look on it. So what is our charge? Our job is three-pronged. Our charge is to advise on the development of a plan for services birth to under 3 years of age through a quasi-independent government structure. Pursue the extended Part C option and what types of provision of services for children 3 years and under. So once again, it's going to be what kind of information will the advisory committee need? Next slide. Next slide. All right. So there's 4 components of the plan: to establish and appoint an independent governing board for the quasi-independent government agency, current or proposed memorandum of understanding, how the plan addresses each of the 16 minimum required components, and a detailed timeline for implementation, including but not limited to resources needed, any necessary statutory or regulatory changes, and any other information necessary to implement the plan. Next slide. And now we'll start getting into it. So, establishment of and appointment of an independent governing board for quasi-independent structure. On the primer, I did write down some ideas for us to consider just to start our conversation of things we might want to ask or things to ask, and I'm looking for what else. So we wrote down, what is the administrative structure of the existing intermediate education unit? What is the fiscal oversight mission oversight structures that currently exist? So how does DOE fiscally provide oversight and mission oversight? What is the DOE currently thinking about how to structure that quasi-independent? And what is the plan for providing oversight, and how would that be different than they would provide oversight for an SAU? Are there other questions that we should ask? And the next meeting, DOE will come back with answers to be able to comment and advise on this. What other information might we need?
Let me just check in. Thank you, Nancy. Let me just check in with DOE/CDS and say, does the list these examples, are these achievable? Does this make sense given your understanding of the charge?
Yes, it does. We will have a draft document to review in the next meeting for the quasi-independent government agency.
Thanks. And are there other things in addition, Nancy, to the list that you helped compile for examples? So what we've been hearing are the examples. Are there other things that you would like to better understand? And I'll just invite you to raise your hand. Hearing none, let's keep moving. Thank you.
All right, next slide. So this is really our opportunity to ask questions that will be answered next time. So number 2, current or proposed memorandum of understanding between DOE and DHHS. For primer, I wrote, we understand that you will share the proposed MOU when it's approved by the commissioner. We will have will we have the opportunity to suggest changes that you will be able to act upon, and can we see the existing MOU? Are there other, and it is my understanding that MOU will be sent as soon as there's a green light. Are there other questions or other things that you might want to know about this? Okay,
Thank you, Rita. Yep, so Rita, I'm noticing in the chat that you added examples of other quasi-government agencies in Maine. Thank you. Others? And you're welcome to pop it in the chat or say it out loud. Hi, Carrie, thank you. Any legislation that may be upcoming that could impact the DHHS DOE MOU?
And I really want to encourage people to talk out loud as well. You are welcome to stay in the chat, but ideally I'd love this to be a conversation as well. That was actually for previous. Yes, I know.
Thanks, Rita. Are there other things that you'd like to better understand?
Do we have, you know, input from CDS about things that have been working or haven't been working under the current MOU?
So we could ask for that input. What's been working? Where have there been struggles? Thanks, Heather.
I would just add to my comment that might be specific to main care billing, because I think that's an important point and plays a role in the MOU with DHHS and DOE, because that plays a role into our funding for this.
Thanks, Carrie. Anything else? Aaron and others, are these doable?
We, can't predict what the legislation will be in regard to main care, but we can, the DHHS and CDS MOU, I don't feel like that is going to be impacted by the main care issue. So that's all I would say. We can talk about the impact of the DHHS CDS MOU, and we can reflect for you number 3, but we wouldn't be able to potentially get you information on future legislation.
Thank you, Rita.
Oh, I just wanted clarification. If Carrie was asking about examples of other MOUs that main care might have with other organizations.
We're seeing in the future, Rita, because of other stakeholder groups that I sit on, there's possibly some changes to the way in which main care can be billed that would impact CDS. I didn't know if that would impact the MOU at all between DOE and DHHS.
Jamie, can you field that question about what the DHHS MOU encompasses? Because my dog is having a problem right now. Sorry.
Yeah, there's really no fiscal component or anything about billing, main care, or anything like that. It's primarily geared towards what their programs will provide to us, like who they'll refer and when, and then what we'll provide back. So for example, trainings to their staff about our early intervention program. So there's no fiscal or billing component to our MOU. Does that help?
For me, it helps. For me, it also makes me, as we're going through this, the committee might, after we review the MOU, decide whether or not we should advise that there should be, which is a possibility. Great. All right, let's move to the next slide. Now, I don't remember, were you guys able to send out these forms? I did not see them. You were, okay. All right, so it was sent out earlier, probably under the pre-read, but how the plan to address each of the 16 minimum required components under the federal IDEA sections for a statewide comprehensive system of intervention services will be addressed. And we asked, please provide the 16 minimum required components and how the state currently addresses those components and changes the state is considering making. Erin, would you tell us briefly about what you sent out?
Sure, we sent you the 16 minimum required components and how CDS, those are federally approved every year annually. So we sent out the federal approval that came from OSEP, and we an explicit listing of the 16 components.
Great. So
Oh, I was just going to invite Heather in because she had her hand up.
Oh, I was just going to put out there, and I don't know if it's here or later on in the slides that it would pertain to more, because this is more around, more of the legal components, but how the Help Me Grow system coming into Maine would be interwoven into this.
Great.
Thank you. Nancy, were you going to say something?
I was. If you haven't had an opportunity, like clearly I didn't have an opportunity to look at the 16 components. If you didn't have an opportunity for this meeting, would you please for next meeting so that you can ask questions. I also want to invite you to email questions to Carol and copy me about what else you might want to know. Ideally, the next meeting, we're going to get a lot of data back. We're going to look at the data. We're going to ask questions about the data, and then we're going to start looking at advice and coming to consensus about what we want to advise the department on, and if the legislature should call us up, what we would feel what you would want me to say. What's the consensus of where the group not have consensus. Where did we agree? Where did we not agree? And why? That kind of information is going to be very important. So, all right, let's go to the next slide, because this is where we start getting into some deeper questions. All right, a detailed timeline for implementation, including but not limited to what resources are needed, any necessary statutory or regulatory changes, and any other information necessary to implement the plan. I did prime us with a few questions like, what is the number of CDS kids in Maine, Part C, by county and by age? What is the number of staff by type and staffing, and what are the staffing needs? What are the current resource needs for the following, and what are anticipated needs? What's the draft timeline to transition Part C services? And how will 4-year-olds and potentially some 3-year-olds being moved to SAUs affect the organizational staffing issue? What's the structure of the staffing needs?
Carrie?
I would ask, because Chapter 115 and its changes to certification possibly could play a role in the staffing challenges, for any updates as to where that stands, since they're looking to change the certification to pre-K, from K to pre-K.
Others? Andrea, hi, I see you dropped a note in the chat. I wonder if there's any flexibility on collecting data around the 4-year-old transition to SAUs, if that's the direction we go, and having that data inform the transition of 3-year-olds to SAUs, parenthetically, if that's the direction we go. Thank you.
Can you restate that, please?
Sure. Is there any flexibility? So there are some assumptions in here. Is there any flexibility around collecting data around the 4-year-old transition to SAUs, if that's the direction that you go, and having that data inform the transition to 3-year-olds to SAUs, if that's the direction we go?
I want to keep our scope of this meeting, which is for children under 3, and we will have to have conversations about 3-year-olds. That is in our charge.
Thank you, Nancy. Heather?
Nancy, you might have listed this in your list, but did we have birth rate projections in there?
Good one.
We do not.
And I'm going to just throw a timely one in. There's recently been reports on children who were born, babies that were born during COVID that may have developmental disabilities or developmental delay. There's a much higher proportion of kids right now. Any Part C child find that needs to be looked at to catch those new COVID babies.
Let me do a quick check-in with DOE and CDS in terms of what's being suggested here. A, is it relevant to the charge? And B, is it achievable?
Can I jump in, Carol?
Sure, Jamie.
Yes, all of the data around children in Part C and the various catchment areas by county and age are things we can easily pull together. We could also show you a year over year. So for our last federal fiscal years, how numbers have been trending. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful in the staffing data to know how many of our staff are shared with Part B 619, because we do have a fair amount of employees that work in both programs.
Boy, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Thanks.
And what could the potential repercussions be if they move?
Okay. Are there other things that you would like to add to this?
I see a couple things in the chat, Carol.
Yep. Thank you, Nancy. Yep. Jillian, Carrie first, what about CDS eligibility requirements? And Jillian, you're building on that and saying also how many contracted Part C providers? Heather, thanks for being here and see you. Great.
Excellent.
Anything else here? Do you have any data on where there is a gap or lack of providers? Thank you, Rita.
All right, so we're moving from our, so before we move to our next item, the first of the things that we need to comment on, which is the quasi state agency structure, the MOU, and detailed plan. That's one chunk, and then we need to make a decision about extended services and what age we want to get to. And then what we think might need to happen with 3-year recommendations. And we can have some of those conversations, I think, now of those. But before I move to the extended option, is there anything else? I really want to give you the opportunity to, is there anything else that we might need? And I am looking at funding. I'm wondering if there is a question that we can, are there anticipated costs to this? And then I'll stop. Other people are talking.
Jillian and then Gail. Hi.
Hi, I'm just thinking about the fact that I know current Part C spends a lot of time doing continuing education and trainings with their various providers. And I'm wondering about if there's a way to find out the amount of time they put into that to ensure that that continues.
Thanks. Gail?
I've just been wondering about if Part C becomes their own agency, what is the impact will that have on the existing, and I know we've got two things happening right now with 4-year-olds and so forth, with the existing CDS offices and sites, because you know most of our sites now house both B and C, so you know there's going to be an impact there, I believe. So I'm just curious about that.
Thanks. Let me do a check-in with DOE CDS staff. Anything you're hearing here that you have questions about, or that for some reason might not be providable, which isn't a word?
I don't see anything here. I'll just ask Jamie and Roberta to weigh in if they see something.
Okay.
The only thing that I would say, the anticipated cost, I think that's something that won't be available by the next meeting, but is something that we are looking at and will take some time beyond the next meeting to anticipate the cost. You know, that we have to figure out what the funding availability is and the cost per child, and that's not something that we can determine, and neither could the PCG report.
I'm not sure I need the, I'm not sure I'm looking for the cost exactly in dollars, but maybe cost buckets. You know, there might be an increase in cost in X, there might be a decrease in cost in Y, that kind of thing.
Roberta, does that, is that achievable?
We'll give it a try. I can't, you know, again, we'll give it a try.
Fair
That's
enough.
part of the ongoing fiscal work that's going to be sorting through that. The other piece that will be ongoing work would be the impact on existing offices and regional sites. So those are things we may be able to provide a limited amount of information on, but we may be able to give some.
Rita, I'm seeing you just added data on children relating to CAPTA, child welfare, and the numbers of children born exposed to substances who may need referrals. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Now we're moving a little bit. We're shifting a little bit in our work from asking questions, although we can still ask questions. That is still our job. But potentially giving some opinion as well, because we have worked on 3-year-olds for a little bit. Let's move to the next slide. I'm going to invite Erin to please give an overview of the extended Part C options, especially the 3 potentials for the next few slides, and where we're at. There's a lot of meat in this deck. Would you give an overview?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The extended Part C option is something that only applies to children in Part C who turn 3, transition to Part B, and are found eligible. So there's 3 conditions. You have to be in Part C, you have to turn 3, and you have to be eligible in Part B. And depending on the year, many years, around 60% of the children in Part C are also eligible for Part B, because remember that everyone in Part C is considered developmentally delayed, and in Part B, we then ask to define a disability. So it provides early intervention services in lieu of FAPE, free appropriate public education, from children's 3rd birthday until those children enter or are eligible under state law to enter kindergarten. So each state determines the applicable age and duration of the extended Part C option if it chooses to do that. It can also be applied to a subset of children turning 3 over the summer. There's 3 options for the extended Part C. One is from the age of 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 3rd birthday, from the age of 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 4th birthday, or from the age of 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 5th birthday. So imagine a child turns 3 in February. They can delay entering into the FAPE until the next school year, which many would potentially think is a more natural transition. So parents either choose the Part C option or they transition to free appropriate public education in Part B. Services in the Part C option are continued on an IFSP with an addition of an educational component that promotes school readiness and incorporates pre-literacy, language, and numeracy skills. And parents have the option at any time to request a change from IFSP to FAPE. So there are only 2 states at this time who implement the extended Part C option. Both of them implement it to age 4. In Maryland, the data showed the percent of children served in Part C option was from 11 to 15%. 15.9% was the highest percentage, and that occurred in 2011 out of the 2009-2017. So it was averaging 11 to 15%. In DC, from 2014 to 2017, which is when they first began, the data again showed 9 to 15%. There are some federal funds available for extended Part C option through OSEP, and funds are divided amongst the state approved for this option. The next application deadline is May of 2022. We expect that there will not be a lot of funds available as more states apply for this option. And so just as a state, we have to not rely on the funding that might be available for the cost of these services. So we wanted to look at children in Maine and the data that we had. Now, some of this is, I think you may recall, some of this is COVID related. So in 10-2020 to 10-2021, the numbers are during that period. Also 2019 to 2020. So we think that the 2018-19 data prior to COVID is probably the best data to look at in terms of averages. So out of 704 children who transitioned, 580 were found eligible for Part B. So 580 of those children at age 3 could have chosen an extended Part C option. If we use what the other states have found, and they have found 15% of the parents choose Part C extended option, then we would know that in Maine, about 87 children statewide would be eligible for a Part C extension. The reason why many parents don't choose a Part C extension is that it's a delay of FAPE. So it's a delay of a free appropriate public education. And many parents feel that they want to directly, have that IEP in place as, when they transition in Part 3. So 15%, we're talking 87 children. And then the 3 options are to age to 3, to the school year after the 3rd birthday, to the school year after the 3rd, let me go back.
Yeah, let's go back to that. Let's just stay on that slide now.
So from age 3, this is where the information is. From age 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 3rd birthday. From age 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 4th birthday. Or from age 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 5th birthday. So that's a delay of FAPE from the 5th birthday. That would be a delay of FAPE for 2 years. So that would be 2 years of preschool instruction that would not be, you would still be relying on the IFSP. There would be, remember, an addition of some pre-literacy language and numeracy skills. However, those aren't clearly articulated in the law what those would be. So we would, as a state, be determining that.
Thank you. All right, let's take a minute and talk about the, these options. You want to bring us through the pro and deltas?
Sure. So this is what we had discussed. This is some of the comments that we captured from the first meeting where we talked about the extended Part C option with this group. The pro, the good things are there's no gap in services between Part C ending and Part B beginning individualized. Oh, sorry, Part B beginning. There's no gap in services. The service is individualized, so that's a pro. It offers parents options, always good to offer parents options. It offers a natural transition in the beginning of the school year. Parents can change their mind at any time if they want to have their child participate in preschool. It provides parent support for a longer period of time. So at the third birthday, Part C service, that family support discontinues. So this would allow that support to continue until the next school year, the beginning of the next school year. So the deltas, the things that are more concerning, the delay of FAPE is 6 hours of preschool education. So that would be preschool education that children would be delaying and thinking about preschool readiness, preschool and how it readies children for school. There may be an associated risk there. No clear expectation for pre-academic skills. There's no there are early learning, there's early learning standards, but without preschool curriculum and having it home-based, there's really not an understanding of how effective that might be. There is a potential lack of preparation for school-age services, including socialization and functional behavior in a preschool setting. It limits peer-to-peer opportunities. There's a lack of staff preparedness right now in Maine because Part C staff have never done this. So we would have to determine how that would look in the home, how we would work on pre-academic skills in the home. And then there's budgetary implications for staff training and acquiring additional staff for the academic pace.
Okay.
So shall we pause, Nancy? Shall we ask for clarifying questions first about anything anyone's hearing that they, okay.
I think clarifying questions, but also, and thoughts and comments.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about what you're hearing? Let's start there. Clarifying questions. And now let's go to thoughts and comments, observations that you have based on what you're hearing. I know we've been over this, but it also feels like it's important and we want to make sure that you're, that you've had a chance to weigh in here. Thoughts and comments? Jillian, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can clarify when you say that parents can change their mind at any time, does that mean that they could literally go back and forth between the two until the end of the timeline? Or is it that they can stay with the IFSP and then at any point in time elect to then go the FAPE route?
Yes, that is what would happen. It wouldn't be a back and forth situation. It would be, we're going to do extended Part C, and then all of a sudden they say, you know what, I want to try some preschool services out for my child. So I'm going to call a meeting and we're going to transition to an IEP. That can happen at any time. If it likely wouldn't happen in the summer, but it may happen. Like, let's say your birthday falls in January and the parents say, I want extended Part C option. And then in March, they say, you know what, I want preschool. And so they can change their mind at that point, but it wouldn't be a back and forth situation. You would just be changing your mind and then entering the Part B world.
Thanks.
Thanks for the clarifying question. Gail?
I see that as a problem, given the lack of programs that we have for children. So if a parent changes their mind in March, it's concerning to me because the model is so different. So we would be going from the model that Part C has to basically individual type services, such as individual speech therapy, PT, OT, and then again, 6 hours of programming. So I think we can all probably state that it's really hard to find a program for a child in March.
Gail, if I could clarify, the decision around this shouldn't be based on our programming now. It should be based on when, you know, as we're working toward full support of Part B. So if I understand that the reality right now is it may be challenging to find a program in March. But as we develop programming, that might not be a consideration.
One would hope, that's for sure.
Deb, I'm noticing you dropped in the chat. This seems to be like an alternative transition plan to Part B. This may seem like a simplistic explanation on my part, but this is the way I think about it. Thank you. Sarah, hi.
I think that this would help a lot of parents, a lot of them, you know, having the option to start at the beginning of the school year. I wonder if there's any data on other states that have similar options and what they do with the mid-year, especially those that have a public pre-K. Are they enrolling new kids in the middle of the school year? And how is that impacting those children? What is that transition like? Is that, I just know from experience, having preschoolers join a class where all the other kids have been working on class rules and expectations and kind of know their routine, that can be really difficult to have a child, especially one with special education needs, join in. Not that we wouldn't provide them the supports necessary, but that's just something to consider, and that I'd like to look at how other states have handled that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I would throw one more question your way, which is, do you have enough information to be able to provide your advice or what you think we should do? And maybe, Erin, if you could go back to those 3 slides again. So do you have enough information to give an opinion at this point? And if
that's a question for Erin?
No, that's a question for the group.
Thank you. Lori?
I was just wondering if there's any updates on President Biden's proposal to extend Part C.
Any updates on the Biden front?
Sorry, I'm having a issue with my mute button right now. No, there's no updates. The budget hasn't passed, and there's no in that budget, we had talked about that there was an initiative there that would allow every child who is transitioning to stay in Part C until the next school year after their 3rd birthday. That has not been passed yet.
It seems like it's getting closer. So maybe let's all cross our fingers before the next meeting. We will know if that's moving forward, because it certainly simplifies this topic.
Okay. Nancy, I think you posed a question, which is, do you have enough information if we were to do a straw poll, you know, to see where people are at?
And I'd like to know if people are comfortable doing a straw poll. If they don't have enough information, what might they need?
We have an actual poll for this. I want to remind CDS staff that they're here for professional support and expertise in this area, but should not be entering the poll.
And before we do that, are you willing and ready to do this?
Anybody? Yeah, so let's ask it in a way that we can sort of do this via Zoom. Anybody not okay weighing in via poll at this point? And if so, what would you need to better understand in order to do that? Anybody not okay? Rita?
Yeah, I recall understanding a lot about this last spring during the legislative session when we were talking about it, but I must say that I could really use more of a refresher about what in particular we were feeling at that time that this got into the legislation that was going to be particularly helpful. And was it around the transition of services? But I could definitely use.
My memory was that especially Representative Millette was not feeling comfortable with the idea that if people wanted to stay in Part C, they wanted them to be able to stay in Part C for additional years and not transition to Part B. And she was really looking at is there value in having this option available in Maine? And if so, what age? With the idea that if people are comfortable in the Part C model, can they stay there?
I think there was a little bit of a misunderstanding about Part C extended option. I think potentially members of the legislative committee and many people, because this is very complex information, thought that any 3-year-old could be in a Part C extended option and didn't realize that there were criteria where a child would be eligible. And so if a child is referred for special education as a 3-year-old, they cannot have the option of a Part C extension. So that was, I think, a misunderstanding. I think the legislative team thought because the idea for people is uncomfortable, the thought that 3-year-olds will have to go to public school, which is not true, but it was that's something that people worry about. They don't want 3-year-olds to necessarily have to go to public school. They want other options for 3-year-olds. And so what we did was we kind of took it apart in these slides that you've seen. This is, I think, the maybe second or third time we've reviewed them, to show people that in the states that do this, there is a percentage of children that would qualify for this. Not every child in Part C would qualify for it. You would have to be qualified you'd have to go through eligibility determination in Part B. And of that group, based on the data that we have in the 2 states that do this, about 15% of the parents elect to delay FAPE. And in Maine, that would be, based on our data, about 87 children based on our calculation. So about 87 children in Maine could benefit or may benefit from this Part C extended option. So the question is, do you feel ready to ask, do we want to do this? And if we want to do this, where are people comfortable with this moving, the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th birthday?
Rita, does that answer? Does that give you the historical context you were seeking? Or are there other things you want to better understand?
End of the 3rd year, it might not be enough. I would want it all the way to the 4th birthday. I would want it throughout the entire 3rd year, without a doubt. And that's what I'll be voting on. I don't see a lot of harm in this because I don't think it's not something anybody has to do. And it allows our Part C to evolve as it's going to evolve without tying any of our hands. That's my opinion. So I put my chair back on.
Can you promote Sarah Forrester to panelist, Roberta? And I apologize, everybody had to see my email just then. I had to get that link to Sarah Forrester. So,
Roberta, I'm going to call on you, but I don't know if you need to do that first, and then I'll invite you in, and then. Okay, great. Hi, Sarah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Oh no. Welcome. We are just in the midst of a discussion about Part C. So, Roberta,
Excellent.
the floor is yours.
The only thing I just wanted to add to everything that Erin has said, and she has said this, it's not an automatic. We do have to apply for this. So even if we choose to, if we as an advisory group choose to do this, it still has to go through the application process to OSEP as part of our Part C funding.
Thanks for clarifying. Jillian?
I have another, I guess, clarifying question to better understand this. So I know that currently there's times when a child turns 3 and there's not any programs currently available. So they're kind of waiting for a program to become available. With this option, does it give the parents the opportunity to stay on their IFSP if they're on a wait list for a program, or would they not even go on a list to get into a preschool or a program until they've chosen the FAPE option? Does that make sense?
I would ask you to think about this as if we had no wait lists in Maine. Sure. Because this isn't really this is really an option where families, it's not an either or option. If the family wants preschool, we want to provide them preschool. And if the family wants to continue their IFSP until the next school year, we would like to do that. So while I totally understand the reality of the situation of not at this point in time having the services, that are available, the CDS is working diligently to increase those services so that that is not a condition of this question for parents. So I appreciate it.
This would be if they chose FAPE, then they would be going immediately into whatever program that would be, or they would stay with their IFSP and have services in the home.
Yes.
Okay. Or in their natural environment.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, opinions at this point? Is there any reason at this point not to float the poll? Does anyone want to make a case? Okay, then let's do that. Erin, do you want to advance us to the poll?
Roberta, are you going to do the poll?
Here we are. You will see the poll in front of you lists the discussion points that we've just been reviewing. Should we advise DOE to apply for OSEP?
We have a problem. All the panelists cannot vote. It said host and panelists cannot vote. And we're all panelists, so nobody can vote.
Okay, Tracy. Is Tracy on this call?
No, she's not on the call.
Well, one thing we can do is invite you to put your answers in the chat.
Let me see if I can fix it. Yeah, why don't you put your answers in the chat? The first question, and again, this is only for panelists, not for CDS staff.
Instead of the chat, what about raising hands?
That's fine.
Can I see everybody?
We can through 2 screens. We won't be able to do it in 1 screen, I suspect.
Oh, okay.
So let's just do it this way to simplify things. Let's do a show of hands. We're only going to do, so should we advise DOE to apply for OSEP for a Part C extended option? You've heard Roberta's explanation of that application is required. If you are in favor of that, Let's do hands up. You can use your raise hand feature if you're in favor of applying. So far, I'm seeing 6 who are saying they are in favor.
Deb, can I get you to
Okay.
write down who's voted yes? Thank you.
I think I just relaunched it. Does it
Great.
work now?
Oh,
Is it working?
it looks
It
like
is.
it.
Let's do
Okay,
it.
I
So
edited
then
it.
I'll invite
Yeah.
everyone who put their hand up to lower their hand and all to vote, even if you raise your hand, everyone vote here. Let's just go with question 1 for a moment. Should we advise DOE to apply to OSEP for a Part C extended option? Yes or no?
And I believe there's 12 of us who are voting.
That should be right. Yeah.
So I leave it to you, Roberta, when it's ready.
And you should just be able to click on an answer and then hit submit, if that's not obvious from looking at this.
I won't be voting just because I'm running the poll, just so you know. So there, I can add that. I can add that after.
Okay. And then let's also, for those who are voting, to say to what age, and you can see the 3 options here. Let's invite you to choose one among the 3. And then Roberta, when the count looks like we're close to full, let us know on both questions 1 and 2.
Okay.
I believe there are only 6 panelists on this call, and we may have to obtain a vote from the other panelists.
You mean there's only 6 of us, six of the advisory members?
Yes.
Well, 7 including me.
7 including Roberta. So we have the votes for those participants, and we will capture that data. And then we will seek the other participants' information after this meeting.
Okay.
So would you prefer to wait to review the results until everyone is weighed in?
No, I'd like to see what they are for the 7 that are in the room. That's a majority.
Okay.
Not a very good majority, but.
So we're at 100% for the first. Should we apply? Yes. And it looks like, and Nina Cunningham said before she signed off that she would vote for option 2 in question 2 from age 3.
Great. Thank you. All right, that gives some very solid information, and I really appreciate that. I'm not sure we need to revisit that part. We can move on, and I'm not sure we have to revisit that part until the very end of our work. There's other decisions that have to be made. All right, let's move on. So here's the next one, and this is, it's time to ask for data requests, questions, feedbacks, and really have a conversation. The other thing that we've talked about, and is where should 3-year-olds go? So what we've been talking about was Part C, which is under 3, or the Part C option, which is what we just voted on, saying that they could have the option if they're eligible. But what about, in general, 3-year-olds Part B 619? What do you want to make sure that DOE considers in this decision? And what's on the screen is what has been provided us in the past, which is a hybrid model, which my understanding, and Erin, you'll have to tell me if I'm wrong, and I easily could be. The hybrid model is for a period of time. Essentially, CDS would still be the responsibility of supporting and providing support to school districts. It says FAPE obligations are on the SAU. Is that true? You want to kind of go through the hybrid? I thought it was something different.
I'm sorry, having a problem. Roberta or Jamie, you're going to have to answer that question. I didn't hear.
What we did, right, what we did talk about in preparation for this meeting, that FAPE obligation on the SAU, and then it was /CDS, so it could be on the hybrid model, either CDS or SAU, if I remember correctly.
Okay, that
Sorry,
makes more sense.
I'm back in. Yes, it could be CDS or SAU would be providing the FAPE obligation.
Okay. All right. So what kind of questions when you hear about the hybrid model might you have? Like clarifying questions about what it means and how it would look. As opposed to SAUs just taking over 3-year-olds. Who would be responsible for child find? And that, I suspect, would be depending on who has the FAPE obligation.
I'm seeing Erin nod. Yep, we're happy to, gather your questions right now. We're also happy to hear if you think, as CDS and DOE is deciding, as this is being decided, let me put it that way, what should be considered? Yeah, what do you want to make sure that the DOE is considering?
So I will just reiterate, and I apologize for that. I'm having some issues with my dog right now. I will just reiterate that during the straw poll and the feedback, that what people were mentioning was that they felt that having a CDS type of organization just to do the 3-year-olds would create so many additional transitions and complexities in the provision of FAPE that people were most comfortable with ultimately transitioning this to the SAU. And then we clarified in one of the meetings, this does not mean that the 3-year-old has to go to the SAU to receive the service. This could mean that the SAU goes to the preschool to receive the service. It could mean that an itinerant teacher from RSU, goes to Little Johnny K preschool and serves the child in their natural setting that's in that preschool. Okay, I don't want to confuse natural setting, but in their preschool setting. Okay, so if SAUs were ultimately given a transition plan, in other words, no one's going to say, starting September 1st, all of you have to take care of 3-year-olds. There would be a transition. And that's why there's an arrow here, because initially we're going to be having this agency that's going to be supporting this transition from 4-year-olds into the SAU. I will also tell this group what I have said yesterday in our 386 meeting. There are SAUs that are currently taking this on right now. There's SAUs that are currently planning for next year. And in January of this year, I know one SAU started serving 3-year-olds. So as SAUs are starting to, more and more starting to take on these services in anticipation of having these services, many of them are wanting to also take their 3-year-olds. So that is what this visual is trying to represent. It means that there's almost a separate transition plan from the 4-year-olds called the 3-year-olds, but it would be to the SAU, and it would be administrative oversight, not necessarily providing the service at the public school. And I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Thanks, Erin. Carrie?
A couple points. First, am I correct, Erin? And if the SAU is not taking on the child, and if they have a public pre-K and they're not taking on the child in the public pre-K, that would have to be an IEP team decision and an out-of-district placement if SAUs took the full responsibility.
No, it would not have to be an out-of-unit placement. It could be an MOU between the preschool and the public school, just like CDS. CDS is an SAU right now. CDS is its own SAU. And so CDS has an MOU with private schools to provide the service, and the school district would have that same agreement.
But would it have to be an IEP team decision?
The amount of service would have to be an IEP decision, IEP team decision. The only way it would be a IEP decision for the placement is that it would be a special purpose preschool, for instance. It could be a special purpose preschool. But if the SAU is saying 3-year-old preschool services in our catchment area are provided by these 10 different preschools, and this is how we're going to enter into, and this is all has to be, you know, determined, Carrie, but it wouldn't necessarily be an IEP team decision if the agreement is that these preschool services for 3-year-old in Madawaska are provided by these 3 different preschools. Does that make sense?
Sorry, it does. I'm just wondering who gets to make the ultimate decision as to where that child attends. If there's those many options, who decides where the child's ultimate placement is?
Well, the SAU would have the MOU with all of those preschools, so it would be up to the SAU to determine the level of LRE in the best placement as it meets the child's needs as determined by the IEP team. Sarah looks like she's going to weigh in.
And I'm just going to say quickly, Andrea had a question about would the MOU be between each preschool and each district?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Sure. Andrea dropped in the chat, would the MOU be between each SAU and each preschool?
Yes, each preschool individually, yes.
Thank you. Sarah, hi. Forrester.
Hi.
Hi.
I understood Carrie's question a little differently, and I apologize if I misunderstood it, but I think what you were asking, is when an SAU has a preschool program for all students, they have a preschool program. Who decides whether or not a child with disability has access to that preschool program or whether they get placed outside of the preschool program? And
ideally, who's going to, I mean, if they have their own preschool program or if they have MOUs with each of these different preschools within their catchment area, who makes the decision as to where that child attends? Right now, for 3 to 5-year-olds for Part B 619, parents are on IEP team and they're talking about where their child's going to attend. My concern is if the SAU has that ultimate decision making in this arrangement, then the parents lose that ability to have an equal voice about their child's placement at an IEP meeting. Does that make sense, Sarah?
All of it.
Okay.
So let me start with the simple question. SAU operates a 4-year-old program, okay? So while most SAUs, you start going to the elementary school when you're 5, in SAUX, you start at age 4. In that case, the IEP team behaves pretty much like the IEP team if the child is in 2nd grade. In other words, if you have a 2nd grader, Carrie, right, you start by saying, well, where did the non-disabled 2nd graders go to school? And of course, the answer is 2nd grade at the elementary school. The trickier piece, which I'm sure is really what you're thinking about, is what happens when an SAU decides to have a public 4-year-old program, either just for children with disabilities because they're taking that responsibility from CDS, or for all children with disabilities, disabled or not. So the question becomes, what are the offerings that are made to the parent? Now, in some SAUs, I can picture, and again, this is SAU X, obviously I'm not talking about anybody's specific situation, that all parents would be offered the choice, subject to like physical limitations, right? Parents get to visit the various participating programs and determine which one they would choose. Now, as you know, those of you who are in districts that operate secondary school programs but don't have a high school, look what happens when there's quote unquote school choice, right? You all probably know that where a child with a disability goes to school may not be exactly the same as where his or her non-disabled peer gets to go to school, because there's an interplay between the requirements of FAPE and the IDEA and the ability of any school, particularly private schools, to serve a child's needs. That tension, in my view, would also apply in the preschool scenario when you're talking about parents choosing among private providers. And of course, I have no better legal answer for that than I have with the high schoolers. And believe me, I've heard it about the high schoolers. The only people madder than the Supreme Court in December when they were listening to our case, they were not happy people, are the parents of high schoolers who have the benefit of being in the tuition program, but nobody wants to choose them. So, very good question. Obviously something...
That can of worms, sorry.
No, it's important though, because one thing that I want to make clear that I feel like has gotten lost, and then I promise I'll shut up, I don't mean to dominate the meeting, is children with disabilities who are in preschool are preschoolers first and children with disabilities second. So as programs have been developed around the state in public schools, that's where those children belong, unless and until the IEP team determines that that is not appropriate. And obviously that decision is made by a group of people, including the parent.
Okay. That's the most important part for me, is that the parents will still have a voice in that decision on that IEP team under this option.
The parent always has a voice on the IEP team. There is no IDEA solution that involves the IEP team, but not including the parent.
Right, okay.
Is there a nuance in that I might ask? So a number of times I've talked to families that have wanted to advocate that their child gets, for instance, speech therapy, which the IEP team says yes. And then the person says, but I want this person to give the speech therapy. And the school says, no, we get to control, you get to have a voice in the service, but you don't get to choose the provider. And I think that's the nuance in this preschool conversation that I think Terry might be getting at.
Nancy, is this you speaking? I just, for some reason, I can't seem to make like all the people show up here.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's Nancy.
Okay. Because I hate like talking at people who I don't know who I'm talking at. You've hit on what I would argue is one of the most complicated, divisive, litigated issues in IDEA land. I mean, let's start with a very simple example, right? Elementary school A has 3 second grade classrooms. I have no idea why I'm obsessed with second grade today. Just ignore that part. Teacher A, teacher B, teacher C. If the IEP team decides that Sarah is going to attend a regular second grade classroom, that's her LRE, then the school, not the IEP team, decides if she goes into the classroom with teacher A, teacher B, teacher C, right? In other words, what the IEP team, including the parent, is saying is that if you look at the LRE spectrum, continuum, Sarah's LRE is with a regular second grade class. But the actual selection of the teacher, that's in the it's the school's decision. That Next step out, Nancy, is the example you gave about the speech therapist, right? So Sarah's in 2nd grade, and not only is she going to classroom A, but she needs speech therapy. And so the IEP team says, Sarah needs speech therapy, and it needs to be pull-out. In other words, in this case, because of her need, we're not going to have the speech therapist in the 2nd grade classroom, with her. We're going to have her pulled out. And the parent says, great, I'd like to have Ms. X be her speech therapist. Well, of course, Ms. X doesn't happen to work for the elementary school. And so the school says, no, we're assigning the elementary school speech therapist. Now we get to stage 3, which might be what you think was Carrie's question. Now the question is, the LRE, the IEP team for a preschooler, so not a 2nd grader, so we don't have this default idea that there's a 2nd grade class sitting there waiting for him or her. IEP team says, Sarah needs an environment where there are no more than 6 children in the classroom. And trust me with this, since I don't have a preschooler, if I'm saying something that's facially absurd because no one would have a classroom with more than 6 students in it, just ignore it, okay? But the point is, the IEP team does an excellent job describing LRE. Then the question is, who gets to decide whether that's in the Little Red Caboose preschool or the Daffy Duck preschool? And I can tell you with all of my significant knowledge of the law of special education, nobody knows. No, the point is, I've seen cases, hearing officer decisions all over the place because everybody seems to agree that LRE is clearly a spot on the continuum of placement. But where people tend to fall apart, oh, by the way, and everyone seems to understand that when it comes to literally a seat in a public school, the public school has pretty significant discretion as to what seat you sit in. But I've seen decisions, to be honest, where the hearing officer or the court says, actually, you know, the IEP team gets to say whether the student goes to, I don't know, Mountain West School or Abacab School, when both of them technically meet the definition of LRE as described on the IEP. I've seen other hearing officers and other courts, and remember, they're all interpreting the same statute, say no. It's no different than the example of, you know, just the seat in Ms. X class or Ms. Y's class. As long as both options are the same on the continuum that is the LRE, then the public school district gets to assign the student to a school. So there you go, Nancy. You asked the question and I gave you what I think is the most honest and complete answer because we're all battling about it.
Well, and I will also suggest that because CDS has relied on private industry to provide preschool services, it has been parental choice. That will shift and transition once the SAU is providing the service. So again, my suspicion is that, you know, there could be regional programs established. That came up in a conversation yesterday. Regional programs could pop up that are providing, that include general education. But again, you know, it is a shift in what has been occurring because CDS can't deny any placement that a parent chooses at this point. If that makes sense.
I think it's still presented as an IEP team decision, Erin, when they're having the conversations. It's just that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I understand.
The team usually has the same consensus as the parent. So the team gives the parent the options. The parents go and visit the preschools, and typically the parents come back with their 1, 2, 3 options, and then the team consensus usually will align with the parents. It's much so. Yes, it's that's not a problem. It's just that what parents think is that, oh, it's my choice, when in actuality, the law states that it's an IEP team decision, so that this movement is going to appear to parents as all of a sudden it's not their choice. When it's never been 100% their choice, it's just that the way we've been operating, it appears to be that way. And that's sort of my roundabout way of coming about and making my point to, I mean, I like in default to SAUs having the option for 3-year-olds at some point when we're able to make that transition in a way that is good for our 3-year-olds. But there's going to have to be a concerted effort to educate parents on this change and what it's going to mean for placement. I mean, for everything, but I think specifically placement is where you're going to come up against some of the bigger arguments with parents.
And in the name of time, thank you. I'm going to intervene. It is 2:28 and we only have a couple of minutes left here. So thank you for the substantive discussion to be continued, I think. And with your permission, I'm going to transition us to probably 1 minute of next steps, and then we're going to sign off. Nancy, as chair, do you want to touch a little bit on next steps?
When we come back, there will be answers, and we will go through the answers. They'll be sent to us ahead of time. I also think that Sarah there'll be a presentation about the public instrumentality and those options. So next time we start really kind of digging a little bit into the substantive answers of where the department is thinking of going, and providing us an opportunity to ask more questions and begin talking about our concerns. And then the third meeting is going to be, what advice do we have? You know, how do we frame that up into a kind of report or recommendation list that can be shared so that it's documented so everybody can see what we advise. Questions?
Nancy, not to be stupid, but are you going to tell me what I'm supposed to do before the next meeting?
I would never tell you what to do, Sarah, ever. But, are you kidding me?
No, I just heard Sarah's gonna, and I was like, oh, I'm Sarah.
So Aaron, I just saw, do you want to say, I just saw you put something in the chat to everyone. Do you want the floor?
Yeah, these reports are due on February 1st. I would love to just take a straw poll of the voting members to see if they're in favor of, as Carrie said, a very careful transition with lots of parent information and education. And if those things happen, are people supportive of 3-year-olds shifting and transitioning? So I'd love to see if we can get just a temperature read on that. Doesn't have to be final. We can have more information, but I would love to just see where people are at.
Before we go there, Sarah, let me explain. Aaron,
can you take that offline, Nancy? I'm really sensitive to people's times. Can you do that? I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay, thank you. So those of you who are here in your official capacity, are you comfortable with what Aaron just posed? Thumbs up if yes. Aaron, do you want to restate just in the name of clarity?
Sure. I just, in the name of clarity, if you give me a thumbs up that you support the transition of 3-year-olds to SAUs with the criteria of it's a gradual transition with lots of support, both for families and for SAUs.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from 2 people, 3, 4.
I'm sorry, my computer froze, so I totally missed the question.
So Jillian, the question is, if the proper supports were in place, a transition plan and education on both the SAUs and the parents to a degree where people were comfortable, would you feel comfortable transitioning 3-year-olds to SAUs? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I'm seeing thumbs up. I've only seen thumbs up so far from working group members. Okay. Thank you all. Sorry for the untidy ending, and more to follow. Stay tuned. Thanks for your contributions and your patience. All right, and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.